Okay, art critique time. Today I want to do it for a weapon. I'm thinking maybe a demo man weapon this time, a demo man melee weapon. Can you guess which one? It is. Where is it? There you go. The Eyelander. Actually, I already critiqued this last week, but I didn't upload the video to YouTube because I think there was some mistakes in my interpretation. And also, I kinda don't want to repeat on stream usually, but I don't think there was too many people watching, so hopefully it's not gonna be too boring for people here for people to see this again. In any case, the Eyelander. Before I begin the critique, disclaimers as always. I'm not gonna delve too much into game design. There's a lot of people who make lengthy videos and rants about game design. I'm just gonna dip a bit because I'm gonna focus more on the visuals. And also, for this critique specifically, I'm following Feldman's method, which is about 4 steps in order: description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. On the description, I'll describe what I see. On the analysis, I will look into the elements of art. On the interpretation, I will interpret the creative vision behind the art. And on the judgment step, I will be evaluating this as successful or unsuccessful art, basing myself on the principles of art and how well do they fit together with the vision. So without further ado, let's begin! Eyelander, what do I see? It's a sword. It's a sword, that much for certain. I think I can even be more specific and say this is like a claymore, right? Very specific design of sword. I'm not sure if this is exactly like a claymore, but notably we have like the length of the blade is pretty similar to a claymore, and the guard of the blade in this cross-shaped design. And what else? And just in general, I think also the shape of the point of the blade, I guess. But yeah, anyway, either a claymore or something very close to a claymore. Also, there's a lot of blood on the blade of the Eyelander, I guess I should add. And we have stuff, there's a handle to the blade with a roundish pommel. We're gonna talk about that on the analysis. What else? It's bloody, it's a sword, apparently made out of steel, as you possibly can expect from swords, especially from medieval times, right? What else? There's like some sort of protection part of it. This is maybe made out of leather, maybe, I don't know. I would believe it to be weird if this was wood. Maybe it is, but I don't know. To me it looks a bit like leather. Not sure if there's anything else for me to describe here, because it's just a sword, right? Yeah, bloody in this case. I guess I might as well mention that it seems like it's a bit rough on this part of the blade. We're gonna also talk about that on the analysis. Let's reset the presentation here. Why not? So let's get into the analysis now. So for this analysis, I'm gonna be considering 8 elements of art, your usual 7 plus points. So I'm gonna be doing, like some authors, so I'm gonna be doing points, lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and value. Let's begin. Points. Let's begin with points. So points, it's often hard to find, or they are usually, for example, you could say like there are points, red points would be helping make out the blood stains, right? For over here also. But we could also say that they are the textures of the blood stains, some sort of splatter texture, stuff like that. I think that kind of stuff for the critic. I think I'd rather just describe these as textures. I think it makes more sense to me. So instead of saying there are red points beside the red texture, I think just considering it as part of the red texture makes more sense. So that's what I'm going to do. Other than that, maybe we could say something similar for the guard of the blade. I believe if there are any points there even. Not sure if I would say there are. although there are some texture there. Other than that, similarly, maybe we could make out some points on this part of the sword, which would be kind of a deteriorated leather texture to me again. Don't think I would consider... I think that makes more sense for me to say that. I don't know, is there any other part here with some points that I wouldn't tie to textures? Because that's what I usually do, makes more sense to me usually. On the pommel, I don't think I see anything that would be the case. I don't know, I think that's it in general. So I'll be considering no points, but if you're curious, if I would, as I said, if I would say there were, it would be like lines often. For example, on oops, is my internet connection messed up? Let's wait a little bit, see if we reconnect, so that people on YouTube and on the stream can enjoy the same content. Although I'm not gonna wait too long, I don't want to make this boring. Weird, because my internet does say it's everything is alright, but my streaming software is reconnecting right now. I'm just gonna... Okay, there we go. We should be back online. Okay, so where was I? Lines. Team Fortress 2 aesthetic is often devoid of lines. For example, on this part of the blade, use some... It's kind of hard to see here, but on the what I call the leather protection parting, some aesthetics of some games use like 3D games use some lines to separate sides of the same 3D object or facets and stuff. I can exemplify with the Borderlands game series, Telltale's, many of the Telltale's games, maybe all of them, the Ultimate Spider-Man from PlayStation 2, all of them 3D games with some notable lines in their models. Team Fortress 2 usually avoids that. I think this is an okay angle to show it, even though I can't zoom in. In one of those games, there could be a line here on this intersection between the brighter side and the darker side, looking at this angle. But yeah. And so that's what Team Fortress 2, that's what I've been seeing here with the Eyelander for the most part also. Lack of lines in general. I think the only exception I would say, on this part here of the handle of the blade, I do think there's some slight gradients in darkness, so I think it makes more sense for me to consider this the element of value, shadows, lighter shadows, I think. Or are my eyes deceiving me? Maybe not, that's a common thing, but maybe that's not the case here. Well, but what I will say is that I do see lines on this part of the handle of the sword. I don't think it would be easily to me to consider them as forms or textures or anything like that. So yeah, I'll say these are the lines that I see on the sword, on the handle. They are, in my analysis, I would say they are basically... They're okay, they're not too thick nor too thin. Oops, stop rotating, okay, so these lines. They are not too noticeably thick or thin for lines, for me. They are in general regular in their thickness, they're black lines, and what else? Straight lines, straight, there's not much curvature. You know, even though like... depends on the angle, I guess. Depending on the angle, there's some curvature, fair enough. So on some angles there is not, but on some there is some amount of it. Fair enough. But I still think my analysis on their thickness and the color goes here. And yeah, and varying curvedness depending on the angle. So let's now talk about the elements of shapes. For shapes, well, we got, for example, the very long shape of the blade. By the way, just so you don't mix those up, when it comes to the elements of art, shapes are always two-dimensional and forms are always three-dimensional, just so you understand what I'm talking about here. So for example, through this angle, and since this is a 3D object, different angles give different shapes. For this one we got a very like thinnish shape, then we would change the angle. We got something a bit thicker with a pointy end. In any case, it's a very lengthy shape here for the blade of the sword. As I said before, we have these cross-like shapes for the guard of it, uniting with the handle and the other part. It would be the blade, but there's this, as I said, protection to it. Also notable is the pommel, which is roundish. It's not a perfect circle, you know, because the way it connects, it could be a perfect circle, but it's I don't know, it's like an onion or something, you know, in its shapes. Anything else for shapes? The handle also, you know, very thin, somewhat rectangular, if you look just at the shapes of it. Although it can get a bit oblong on this part, I guess, depending on how you look at it. And I guess that's it in general for the shapes. Nothing too mind-blowing, right? What about the farms now? So farms are 3D stuff, so you use different words and terminology. For example, I'm going to say that the blade of the sword is very flat, as we can expect from blades. So what else for the farms here? We have also these very thin farms for the guards of the Eyelander. They're kind of like a very tall pyramid, right, in their farms. A little bit like that. One way to look at it, I guess. Other than that, we got a cylindrical form for the handle, and finally for the pommel, a sphere-like form there. Again, not a perfect sphere, because there's some smoothness connecting with the handle, but still, I think that's a good way to describe it. A sphere-like form. And I think that's it for farms. Let's talk about... also, I guess we could say that this part here, before I move on, this part here has its unique forms. It has like some sort of curvature to it, a bit protuberant, and I don't know, but I don't think I have a proper name to describe it easily. But regardless, yeah, there is this unique form of the guard connecting with the upper part of the blade and the protection thing. So anyway, let's move on to space. For the element of space, I don't think there's much to talk about here. We could say there is some like moderate use of it between the different parts of the blade, you know, by nature of their cross forms and stuff. But it's kind of pushing it a bit, right? But I don't think I see any other better use of it, because the rest is just expensive, right? It's just like a sword in its background in this presentation here. So there's not much to talk for the element of space here. If that's it for space, let's talk about the element of texture now. So now I'm finally gonna address the bloodstains, you know? So as I said before, they have a splattery texture here for this blood. It's kind of dried blood or something. I also see some sort of, not sure I would call metallic, some sort of maybe scraped off texture on the blade, so it's kind of old. It has seen some battle, has seen some stuff. What else? I did mention it before, but I also see a little bit of a degraded, maybe older, not sure if I would say rugged texture on the protection part. There is like some small holes, some small parts where the fabric has worn off a bit. Maybe a worn off texture would be a good way to describe it. Other than that, on the guard of the Eyelander, as I said before, there is a bit of a texture here. I would call this... what? Not sure if metallic, maybe I could call this a metallic texture. It has some slight imperfections to it also, and I guess that's it. On the handle of the Eyelander, it's pretty common for Team Fortress 2 art to have some pretty noticeable woody textures, but I don't think I see it too much. Maybe a little bit on the lower part of the handle here, some very slight lines that would communicate the woody texture. But on the upper part of it, I don't see that much. On maps, it's very common for you to look at the wooden planks and see very well the textures of wood there. But in here, don't see it too well pronounced. And finally, the pommel of the Eyelander. Can I get a good angle? There we go. On the pommel here, you see a much better defined metallic texture, the way it reflects lights also, even though lights are about the value, the other element of art. But still, I think in here is way more noticeable than on the guard of the Eyelander. On the guard, as I said, I think the imperfections of it is more easily noticeable. So it's kind of a slightly bent texture on the guard. And I did also mention metallic, but the pommel by far I think is pretty more defined, well-defined metallic there. So that's it for texture. Now let's go for the element of color, and now it's gonna be an easy one, right? Because there is not that much variety. We see gray on the blade of the Eyelander, shades of gray on the blade of the Eyelander, on the guard, on the pommel. I think a darker shade of gray on the pommel, or maybe that's an effect from the textures, but anyway. And also on this part here on the handle. And other than that, there is a light shade of brown for this protection part and the handle, and finally red for the bloodstains. So that's it. There's basically these three colors and some slight variations. Yo, hello, welcome to the stream. So there's just that, there's three colors and different shades of it. I don't know if I know the proper names for these shades. Also because depending on the design, I have seen like different sources with different names for shades. It gets kind of a mess sometimes in that color theory stuff. But whatever, I guess we can just say shades of red, brown and gray, and things are golden. So that's it for color, and now finally the last element of art here, value. So which is all about light and darkness, brightness and shadiness. And in here, there is some angles that get some very noticeable light reflecting, right? For example, here we see it very bright on the blade of the sword and a little bit here on the guard also, and the pommel. So, and through other angles it doesn't matter as much. It doesn't reflect that much, so this is strongly tied to the presentation here. But I'll just consider it in game, and naturally the effects from light and darkness would be different, but whatever, we got to choose one presentation, so let's make it this one, let's say. And so yeah, as I mentioned, on some angles, some very noticeable brightness, but other than that, and some shadiness here on the underside of the guard. But I think that's it. Here through this angle, again, intense brightness on the blade, on the handle of it, you know. On specific angles there is some noticeable brightness illuminating most of it, and there is, as I said, shades here. Anything else? I don't know. I would say those are... And the rest, like on other angles, there is not that much iconic shadiness or brightness right anywhere. It's just a minor use of the element here. I guess through these angles a bit shadier on the edge of the sword, but the shadows are mild anyway. So yeah, I guess that's my analysis on value. And before I move on to the next step, I just want to make that, take that away. Let me drink some water also, please. Okay, so now let's go for the interpretation. I'm gonna be interpreting the creative vision here. So let's begin with the basics. This is a weapon for the Demo Man 1442, and I'm gonna be interpreting that as part of the creative vision here. In other words, that they designed this weapon with that in mind. It was not taken from other games or anything like that. What else? There's stuff like the name, the Eyelander, and the mechanics. Whenever you kill someone with it, you gain health and move speed. You have less max health. On the lore, I don't remember the exact phrase from Spaulding, but it does mention it's haunted, and that's why it has less max health. What else? There is also, when we think about the game design, when the demon man uses this and kills someone, he will say, I don't know if always, but often he will say, "There can be only one!" The phrase, you know, from Eyelander. The name also, you know, is like that. And what else? And there is also the fact that the demo man is Scottish in lore, which, you know, if we take into account what I said for the Claymore and also other stuff, there's an achievement in this game called Braveheart, or Braveheart, I think, which I don't remember if it's just for the demo man or other classes, but I see that could be a reference probably to Braveheart, where William Wallace does use a Claymore. So we have all these ideas that I can think about here, and so let's list them a bit. So okay, we already mentioned, okay, for this to be a weapon for the demo man from Team Fortress 2. So I'm also gonna say the idea was this should be a Claymore, you know. We have stuff like the Braveheart achievement and the fact that the demo man is Scottish. So we could say that this could be alluded to Braveheart. To be an allusion to Braveheart. What else? What about... there is also stuff like the name, the Eyelander, which it sounds to be a pun on Highlander, and the phrase from the moment there can only be one, so I'm gonna say also to be a reference or allusion to Highlander. What else? By the way, the fact that this is called the Eyelander, you know, it's because the demo man only has one eye. And we could think about that, but that's not a part of the visuals. So, you know, if you're going to say, does the fact that it's called the Eyelander help saying that this is a weapon for the demo man? It kind of does, but what we want to see is how much that's communicated visually. And we're gonna do that on the Judgement anyway. Let's finish the interpretation first. And so, okay, for now we have the moment weapon, Braveheart, allusion to Braveheart, allusion to Highlander. Anything else? Considering all the blood on the blade, and now taking into account stuff from the description and the analysis also for us. I believe part of the vision was this to convey violence in some way, or aggression, or, you know, the decapitation of enemies. This is not a sword for decorative purposes, you know. And I think I'm gonna add that to the vision here, so the idea of something violent, something that conveys violence, you know. Stuff like that. Anything else? I believe makes sense for this interpretation. I don't know. I think those are good enough ideas. So we have 4 here. Just last recap: the moment weapon, allusion to Braveheart, allusion to Highlander, and something about violence and bloodshed. So with that said, let's move on to the Judgement step. For the Judgement step, I'm gonna be considering 6 principles of art for this critique, which will be movement, unity/variety, contrast, emphasis, balance, and proportion. And without further ado, let's go. I like to start with movement usually, which is not about the animation. It's about how work of art can move your eyes around, guide your eyes around in some sort of path or direction. For the Eyelander, where I see it is basically on the extent of the blade. The principles of art refer to how the elements were used by the author, so I often like to mention the elements that were used specifically. So in this case it would be the shapes and forms of the blade of the Eyelander and its color, which is continuous gray. I think all of that helps convey movement. Also the pointy end of it, it's when we talk about shapes and forms. There is the blood for textures, but I don't see the blood is helping too much with movement. Perhaps the tip of it being bloody. Okay, maybe the tip of it. In that case, the color and texture of the blade also. And I guess also the texture of the blade itself. As I said, to me it's kind of a scraped texture, like it has seen some use. And to me, I think it's helping a bit also in guiding my eyes. That's to me the strongest point of movement here. There is other smaller ones, but I don't know. Let's just keep this idea in mind for now. So first things first, does that help? Does that tie in some way or another with a demo man weapon 1442? Well, I do believe it does for one simple fact, considering the what am I doing? Okay, considering the mechanics that says this weapon has a large melee range and deploys and holsters slower. So the fact that it has a large melee range, which is a mechanic of many demo man weapons, and also the Zatoichi, which is a demo man and a soldier weapon. That's something that I'm thinking on here. So it's mostly demo man weapons that have that long range, and that's naturally tied to, as in my own words, the length of the blade. That's what's giving the principle of movement to me. So the only question is the fact that the Zatoichi is a soldier weapon also, is that a problem? For this critique, I will believe it's not, because it's just one weapon and that is also a demo man weapon. And so I still believe I'm not sure iconography, but I still think it's more iconic for the demo man to use longer range weapons. Compare that, for example, with the stock shotgun, which is a weapon for that both the pyro, the soldier, the heavy, and the engineer all of them use the shotgun. So the shotgun I wouldn't consider to be iconic to any of those classes, the stock shotgun at least, because the engineer has a number of unique shotguns. But for the Zatoichi and long range weapons, I believe that's iconic enough to tie it to the demo man. So in this way, the principle of movement is working well alongside the vision here. To remind you that this has that game mechanic, that property of demo man weapons. It would be weird if it didn't, maybe, right? But the important part is that it was intentional here. If it was how the author used the elements here, so it means it was intentional, so working off the visual, etc, etc. Anyway, what about the idea of allusion to Braveheart? So I did say when I was describing this that the length of the blade is something iconic for the Claymore. Not to say the Claymore is the only blade with a long range. We have, for example, the Zoihander, I believe, the Japanese sword. But in any case, but the Zoihander, then again, I believe, has a different shape at the end of it. So yeah, I was mentioning that for the Claymore. And the Claymore, I believe, and I did mention the Claymore is used by William Wallace on Braveheart. And so we have a bit of that here, right? So we have the Eyelander with the similar design to the Claymore. There's the Claymore on Braveheart. Now the only question is that enough to say that that is an allusion to Braveheart, Because Claymore is not the only place in the world that we can see. Braveheart's not the only place in the world where you might see a Claymore and stuff like that. And but to me, in this case, I will believe it is working well with the vision, even because the Claymore from Braveheart, in any case, I don't think it's anything very specific. Like, I don't think it is the William Wallace Claymore. I don't think there is any specific Claymore from that movie. So there wouldn't be any ways. I could be wrong here, but in any case, if I'm not mistaken here, it would be hard anyway to say that this is the Claymore from William Wallace or anything like that, So I guess just saying that just having a design similar to a Claymore should be enough to be an illusion, as I see it. Naturally, we got the other stuff that I mentioned to help out in our with context here. The Braveheart achievement, the fact that the demo man is Scottish, much like William Wallace. And so, you know, there is still some room for debate here. There's that helping, even though there's still some room for debate here. But for this critique, I will consider that's enough to give an illusion to Braveheart. It's kind of a soft illusion, you know, but with the other, visually soft illusion, but with the other stuff, I think it's all working out well, and the visual part is doing its job. So, and what about a allusion or reference to Highlander? So Highlander is a movie, and I think also a series, where we see swords being used. There is an importance to sword for those movies and series. On the second one, the poster is a very big sword in the middle of two dudes, right? So even though I don't think that's exactly a claymore, but we have like some importance to swords, and so the question is, okay, this is a sword. Is that enough to matter? You know, because most of the other stuff is not from the visuals. It's the name, the Eyelander, the pun with Highlander is the way that the moment speaks. There can be only one. I think there's also we could consider the game mechanics that whenever you kill someone you get stronger, because I believe, haven't watched Highlander, but I believe that's also a thing on those movies. And so the question is that enough? And more importantly, is the principle of movement here, making us look at the length of the blade, is that enough to say that to be an allusion to Highlander? And it's kind of a soft allusion, let's say, right? Because again, Highlander, much like for Braveheart, Highlander is not the only place where there are swords, but I will consider that it's good enough for this critique. And in this case, not because it's a claymore, because again, don't think there are claymores on Highlander, but mostly because the length of it, looking at the blade, that's noticeable for claymores, but also swords in general have this unique design, because if it was shorter it could be a dagger, you know? So it's just that I guess I mentioned the claymore because of, among swords I think that's a little bit longer, but in any case, yeah, just having that length of a sword, I believe it's a bit good enough to help with the illusion. So, and again, the rest of the stuff is helping more, but the visuals, I will say it's doing its part. And finally, what about the idea of something violent and giving off feelings of ideas of aggression and stuff? In this case, it's, again, there is the principle of movement, and it's not all of the blood splatter that's helping with that. You know, I did mention there's just a bit of it at the tip of it, but it's kind of hard, basically impossible to not look at the blood splatter if we're looking at the length of the blade, right? So naturally, if our eyes are being guided there, the principle of movement is also helping, makes us look at the blood and conveying the idea that something violent happened with this blade, let's say one way to look at it. So I believe that's also helping with the vision. That's it for the principle of movement. Let's go with the principle of unity/variety now. So unity is all about how different parts of the artwork can apparently work together in one way or another, and variety is the opposite of that. And there are many ways to accomplish unity: continuity, proximity, repetition patterns, so stuff like that. So for example, the continuity of the textures and color, the gray of the blade. We have repetition on the also color and textures of the blood splatter, but if we could also say stuff like repetition of the space on the four corners around the guard of the blade, repetition on the shades of brown, even though not on the textures, stuff like that. And for variety, we could mention the use of lines. We have like this very specific point with lines, the unique shapes and forms of the pommel. What else? Also the unique forms of this part here, stuff like that. All of that can help with the vision, but the question is is it helping with the vision? So, first things first, the idea of the moment weapon. Is the principle of unity / variety helping with that? Back when I was talking about movement, the principle of movement, it was the length of the blade that did it for me. For the unity, does that repetition of the blade help? Does the repetition of the gray and the texture help with that? I don't know. With conveying that it has a long range. It does convey us that this is a sword, right? It has a blade, stuff like that, made out of steel probably. Other than that, I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure just the fact that there is unity and repetition of textures and colors on the blade is enough to convey that it is a long one. Okay, but I do think there is a better way to look at it. We can say there is continuity in the straightness of it. That's unity, you know. First things first, there is on both sides, but just the fact that it's continuously straight through all this extent, I think that's close enough to the idea of the range of the blade. And so I would also tie that to the game mechanics and to the iconic for a demo man weapon, fronting for Pikachu. So specifically it would be the shapes and forms here, the unity through shapes and forms and how long and how much continuity there is in the straightness on this part of on the blade, basically. Okay, with that said, what about the idea of an allusion to Braveheart? I think we're gonna reach a similar logic here, right? Because if you're looking at the extent of the blade, again we're gonna go with the whole argument of the claymore being long, and I guess we can also say that for the Eyelander idea, because again swords have this unique design of a long blade, shorter ones are knives or daggers, when it comes to weapons. So things are repeating themselves a bit. The question is, what about there's also the idea of conveying violence. Although on this one probably is gonna be more interesting to mention the repetition of the blood splatters themselves, instead of looking at the extent of the blade and how close it is to the splatters. We can just mention the splatters. So red and splatter textures, stuff like that. So that's it for unity / variety. Let's go for the principle of unity, variety, contrast. So contrast about differences in the artwork, and there is, for example, contrast between the gray, again, colors and textures of the blade, of the blood on the blade, and the blade itself. So gray and the script of textures on the blade, and red and splattery textures on the blood. But we can also mention contrast between the brown and the gray, and stuff like the circular-like, spherical-like forms of the pommel and the cylindrical ones on the handle. And so all of that are sources of contrast. Does any of that help convey that this is a demo man weapon? In this time I don't think it might, because I don't think the contrast is gonna help too much with that. What we could say maybe is that there is some contrast between the shapes and forms of the blade, of the very long blade, and the guard, for example, but I don't think that's that easily seen. That's a bit pushing it, I think. No, not that much, actually, but perhaps it's a better contrast to contrast the blade itself with the handle. I think there's some contrast there, and we could still contrast with the guard in the length, but I think a better contrast is considering the thickness of the guard and the blade. That's perhaps a better way to look at for contrast. Even though I still can't deny the contrast of length. But yeah, those are, either way, considering we can see contrast in those ways, I think that's also helping us to look at the length and remind ourselves that that's a property of the Demo Man sword, of the Demo Man class, and many of his weapons. What about the... and I guess we're gonna repeat ourselves again, right? Because if we found another principle helping convey the extent and lengthiness of the blade of the sword, again that ties to claymores and again that ties to the design of swords, so also helping convey the vision for Braveheart and Highlander. And finally, what about violence or aggression? In this case, again, maybe we could say that, but more interestingly, I believe there's contrast between the red and the grey, as I said, or the splattery textures and the scraped off textures on the blade. I think that's a stronger way to convey that. What else? Fine, let's move on. Not finally, sorry. Let's move on to the principle of emphasis. So emphasis is all about there being some sort of focal point in the art. For emphasis here, let's see. What is... let me reset my eyes a bit, let's see. Where would I say is the point of emphasis here? I think there is more than one. There's more than one. When that's the case, we can refer to the principle of emphasis as hierarchy and say like there is a point of higher focal emphasis and then smaller, lesser focal emphasis, visual focus. So to me, the strongest one is on the blade, considering its shapes and forms, the length of it again, but also the blood and all of that contrast. The contrast also helps a bit of emphasis. So that would be the strongest source of emphasis, and after that I would say the forms, also contrast, but the forms on the guard, the unique guard, and forms on this part near the protection part. And what else? Color and texture also, in the contrast of the grey and the textures, the slightly imperfect texture on the guard and the more worn out texture on the, as I call it, leather part, so on and so forth. So okay, so those are the 2 points of emphasis that I see here. Does that help convey that this is a demo weapon? Well, okay, I guess the important part is, okay, yeah, I do believe the length, the shape, in other words, the shapes and forms is helping to convey the emphasis on the blade, so I guess we're gonna repeat ourselves here. Length is helping convey the length here. What else? Also, with my argument, that's also a reference to or allusion to Braveheart in a way, and in Highlander. And finally, what about aggression? And this time, not because of the length of it, but as I said, the contrast is helping a bit. And the choice of color red in grey, I think that's helping to convey emphasis and makes us look at the blood and think of violence and aggression. If this was like some grey and in black, like if it wasn't blood, you know, if it was, I don't know, tar, in the grey, it would be harder to see contrast there, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's it for emphasis. What about the principle of balance? Balance, which is all about there being some sort of state of equilibrium or tension in the art. So stuff like that. And in the Eyelander, I believe, like, considering for swords in general, I believe there is not like expressions of lack of equilibrium or stuff like that. But for claymores and the Eyelander by extent, the very lengthy point of it, I think, again looking at the blade, yeah, I do believe conveys a little bit of visual balance to me. To me, it looks like it's a bit longer than it should, and that it's gonna make it a bit harder than it should for the wearer to hold it. To me, visually, that's being conveyed. I believe I would expect a sword to be shorter. Let me see real quick. Yeah, possibly. So either this would be like a long sword, and long swords look a bit visually look a bit unbalanced to me. I'm not a sword expert, so don't get me wrong. I could be wrong here, but that's how I see it. And so the length of the blade is the only source of lack of equilibrium, and tension I don't think I see anywhere, or stuff like that. And there are other parts, everything's in equilibrium, so that's it. So does any of that help convey that this is a demo man weapon? Are we gonna be forced into the same argument again? Let me see. I'm thinking if it matters, because if it was a slightly shorter sword, I don't think I would see visual imbalance there, so I don't know. Let's just simplify, right? I think we're gonna have to accept that going on again. So focus on the length of the blade, strongly tied to that property of the game of a longer range. So yeah. And similar logic for the Braveheart, although for the Highlander, I'm not sure if I should do this. If I should say that, normal swords are not always visually imbalanced to me. Not sure if for the Eyelander there is a counter argument here. But I think if you just look at it and say, oh, it's lengthy, and swords have that lengthy design, maybe it is okay for this context. I think if it was like a bunch of swords lined up and there was a claymore in the middle of it, then it would be important that this is a bit lengthier than other swords, but just being in isolation, I believe it's okay, then everything's okay, then doesn't matter. And lastly, aggression and violence, is that gonna be enough to do it again? So visual imbalance, okay. In this case I think it will, but also there's the fact that it seems there to be a more higher focus of blood at the edge of the blade, which is where I see the visual unbalance, so I think it's helping actually very well to convey violence there, the blood being on the tip of the blade. So yeah, interesting how small details I think are helping convey the vision in different ways here, even though we're basically using the very same argument every time, so it's kind of a bit boring right now, but still there's some small stuff here for us, I guess. And finally, the last principle of art is the principle of proportion, which is about different sizes of stuff. Yeah, I guess we already know where this is going, right? But yeah, the things that I usually do for the principle of proportion is to try to place things in different scales, roughly, to see if one is bigger than the other, and also to take a look at noticeable proportions in the art, because sometimes it doesn't make sense for you to say that something is bigger than another, but sometimes something is very lengthy, and stuff like that, so I also look at the noticeable dimensions, and also to compare with other parts of the art. So for the Eyelander, let's see, if we're gonna talk about noticeable dimensions, let's talk about the length of it once again. And other than that, if I were to place things in scales, the blade would probably be the biggest one. After that, I would mention the protection part and the handle, and actually like the guard I would place in the same scale, and after all that the pommel in the last scale. So the pommel and let me see, the blood splatters, maybe I would place the pommel and the blood splatters in the same scale, stuff somewhat. I'm kind of like broad stroking, because does it even make sense to place the blood splatters, say it's bigger or smaller than anything? It's kind of a rough way to do it, but I think it helps for the critique. And with all that said, does any of that help convey? You already know what I'm going to say. convey that this is a demo weapon again, the length of the blade, obviously, and what else? And that's the same argument for Braveheart and Highlander. And finally, there is the idea of violence and aggression. So this time I don't think there is any cool shenanigans, let's say. I think it's just the fact that one noticeable part, the blade has all this blood splatter on it, so we're kinda looking at both things, at the blade and at the blood splatter, so easily violence is being conveyed here. So that was it for proportion. And with all that said, okay, how annoying. It's like every single principle helped with every single part of the vision or something. Gosh. It's kind of... what a shame. Because then it's not that interesting, right? It's like everything is working out. I just realized that I could have added the idea of this being a haunted weapon on the interpretation, but I don't know. But the thing with being a haunted weapon in this case, you know what time is it? No, still have plenty of time. Okay, so if we were to end the critique right now, I would call this a successful work of art, because, you know, yeah, apparently it conveys that this is a demo main weapon, this is has some allusion to Braveheart, to Highlander, and to violence and aggression. But and then I would just call this a successful work of art and end it right here. But since we still have plenty of time in this stream, I think I might as well... Let's reinterpret this, let's say. Let's add the idea that this is haunted. That's what I did the last time, I forgot to do it right now. And so basically this is gonna be a... Technically this is another critique, you know? So that was that critique, with the 4 ideas of the vision. And so we had that, and that's it, successful for that critique. But what we can do is just take a lot of what I already said. I believe we can do that. To just take a lot of what we already said, and I'm going to reinterpret this, basically adding the idea that this is haunted, and specifically secretly haunted, because why do I say it's haunted? Okay, so we're back in time here. Now we are again in the interpretation step. So this is basically some sort of bonus round, I guess. We're in the interpretation step now. I'm gonna leave all this stuff that I said before because I don't think there's anything wrong, but we're just gonna add that this is a secretly haunted weapon. I say secret because in the comics there's like a joke, the way it conveys that it's haunted is like through a joke, because the demon man is all like, oh my, this weapon is so awesome, I don't know, and he's all like mesmerized, and just seconds ago he was like, no, I'm not gonna fight soldier, and then they give the demon man the sword, and he goes like, oh my god, that's and then Miss Pauline says, oh, also, it's haunted, and then the sword speaks, heads, and then like, just to drive the point home, you know. So, in other words, I believe the idea was in that, so it is haunted, their vision apparently is that it's haunted, but through that joke I believe the delivery of the joke, for the delivery of the joke to be secretly haunted was important. So that's why I'm going to say secretly haunted for this bonus round critique, second critique I guess. For this critique I'm going to be considering everything I said for the description the same, everything on the analysis, and all the other stuff that I said on the interpretation. I'm just gonna add this idea for the vision, for the creative vision here, to be secretly haunted. And then also there's other stuff. There's the fact that the demo man's eye has a green flame when he's got a lot of heads. As I said, there is the game mechanic of your max health getting lower when you equip this item. So okay, And so now, on this new upgraded, let's say, critique, we have one more idea for the vision should be considered here. By the way, the more this is a different critique now, but the more visions, the more complex the creative vision gets, you know, the better the critique in general, I guess, because then we are scrutinizing more of the author's work. So that's why I want to go through the trouble of making this upgraded critique right now. So yeah, so for this interpretation, now we have this new interpretation with everything is the same, but now I'm just adding the idea of a haunted sword. Okay, and now let's go to the judgment step. And secretly haunted. Very important to be secretly haunted, because if it's secretly haunted, what's important here is that if this is somehow conveyed that it's haunted, then it's unsuccessful. You know, it's kind of the other way around. Because if it's supposed to be secretly haunted, it's very important that it can be like anything except haunted, since the idea of you understand, right? It's the very one that secret word to be secretly. That word matters a lot. Right here. So that's the deal. So anyway, so now let's move on to the judgment, and I'm not gonna repeat myself for the other stuff. We're just gonna look at the principles of art and see if any of that has anything about haunted to it. And again, that's the key thing here, because it's supposed to be secretly haunted. If we do find anything that conveys that this is haunted, it's gonna be unsuccessful. So let's see. So for movement, what I said was basically the length of the sword, and through the principles of shapes, forms, color, texture, right? You remember all that? So, does any of that help convey that this is haunted? I wouldn't say so. It's just a blade, you know, it's lengthy, okay, whatever. Okay, so the principle of movement is fine for now. Let's see the principle of unity. Unity, I mentioned a bunch of stuff. I mentioned repetition and continuity on the blade, also repetition on the shades and the colors and textures of the blood. By the way, there's proximity. I didn't mention that, but there's proximity of the blade and the blood on the colors and colors and textures of the blade and colors and textures of the blood. So there's proximity there. So we could say they're working together to convey that the edged part was used, that is what caused the blood. You know, one way to look at it. And there's other stuff that I said, repetition on the brown, on the gray, the variety on the shapes and forms of the pommel, variety on the lines, all of that. Does any of that convey that this is a haunted weapon? I believe in general not, although there's a catch. I do believe the idea that there is a lot of blood, you know, on the sword, and all that stuff that you said that conveys violence, I do believe that could dangerously be... not dangerously be... you know, some haunted weapons are tied to violence and stuff, so maybe that it could convey something there, but that's not the only thing that's tied to violence. This could be just a medieval weapon used by knights and they killed guys, and you know. So I don't think the idea of something cursed being strongly conveyed here is just like a possibility, but I don't think it's strong enough. So okay, working well so far. Then I mentioned contrast. Again, I mentioned the blood splatters and the gray. I mentioned stuff like the length and the shapes and forms of the guard and the handle. Even stuff like contrast of the circular, like round-like shapes and forms of the pommel with the cylindrical-like forms of the handle. Does any of that ties to something haunted? Again, not. And again, at best, the same argument for the blood on the blade. Like, that's the best that it gets. And finally... No, not finally. Now what about emphasis? For emphasis I had said that I had mentioned the blood at the tip of the blade, again I had mentioned the length of the blade, and I had mentioned the design on the guard of it, and then all of that were points of emphasis to me. Does any of that tie to a haunted weapon in any way? I believe not. Once again, the best I've got is the idea that blood can be tied to a haunted weapon that was used for something violent, but that's not the only way you can get something violent going on, and so on and so forth. Then we have the principle of, that was emphasis, balance. Again, there is only the blood at the tip of it, and maybe it's been so long that to me it's a bit visually unbalanced there. Haunted, anything about that? Again, not. So far working well, right? And finally, to me at least, there is the fact that the tip of the sword is a bit darker, and sometimes, especially in Western culture, sometimes something haunted can be associated with darkness, shadows, and those kind of stuff. But in this case I don't think it's strong enough, just being a darker shade of red. And finally, lastly but not least, the principle of proportion. I did mention the scale of everything, so lengthy blade, then blade for the greatest scale, then protection, handle, guard, and the smallest ones, the pommel and the blade. Again, all of that's pretty out there, right? Don't think I see any of that tied to something haunted. And so, basically, okay, so our conclusion is that this is secretly haunted through the principles. At least there's nothing that conveys this is haunted, so if they wanted this to be secretly haunted for the delivery of the joke, visually they managed. So, okay, awesome. Okay, that was the bonus round. I just didn't want things to be... I guess in the end, I don't know if that was really necessary, but whatever, more content for you guys. So, all that's to say that this still is a successful work of art. It still is a lengthy weapon, so you know it has the Demo Man long range weapons property thing. It's also the fact that it's long makes you think of claymores and swords, so Braveheart and Highlander. There's the blood, and through many principles in different ways it helps us look at it and think of violence and aggression. And finally, we found no way that it's clearly conveyed that it is actually haunted. So, in other words, the delivery of that joke that relies on the, you know what I said, on it being secretly haunted, that went well. So hooray for the creators of the Highlander. Good job, good design, and everything worked out. Thanks for tuning in for the critique. Join me on the next one.